Brother convinced my fiancée I had a secret family to break up our wedding. The private investigator's report revealed his own secrets. My whole world came crashing down 3 weeks before what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Everything I had worked for, everything I believed in, all the trust I had built over 4 years with the woman I loved more than anything else in this world. It all disappeared in a single afternoon when she handed me back my engagement ring with tears streaming down her face. She wouldn't even look at me when she said she couldn't marry someone who had been living a double life. The confusion in my mind was overwhelming because I had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. But the pain in her eyes told me that whatever she believed was destroying her from the inside out. When I pressed her for details, she finally broke down and told me that my own brother had come to her with evidence that I had been secretly married to another woman for the past 2 years. He had shown her photographs, documents, and even phone records that seemed to prove I had been maintaining a separate family in another state while planning our wedding. The devastation I felt in that moment was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. Not only was I losing the love of my life, but I was being accused of something so fundamentally against everything I stood for that it felt like my entire identity was being ripped away from me. I tried to explain that none of it was true, that I had never been married before, that I had never even been to the state where this alleged family supposedly lived. But the evidence my brother had presented was so convincing that she couldn't bring herself to believe me over what appeared to be cold, hard facts. The worst part was seeing the doubt in her eyes, the way she looked at me like I was a complete stranger. 4 years of building trust, of sharing our deepest secrets, of planning our future together, and it all meant nothing in the face of what appeared to be irrefutable proof of my betrayal. I spent the next few days in a state of complete shock, unable to eat, unable to sleep, unable to function normally. My brother, who had been my best man and had helped me plan every detail of the wedding, was suddenly unavailable whenever I tried to call him to demand an explanation. The wedding venue had to be canceled, the deposits were lost, and I had to face the humiliation of calling every guest to tell them the wedding was off. I couldn't even give them a proper explanation because I didn't understand what had happened myself. Friends and family members started taking sides, and I found myself isolated from people who had been part of my life for years. Some believed me when I insisted I was innocent, but others seemed to think that where there was smoke, there must be fire. The loneliness was crushing, but the anger I felt toward my brother was even worse. I knew he had to be behind this somehow, but I couldn't figure out why he would want to destroy my happiness or how he had managed to create such convincing fake evidence. After a week of wallowing in despair, I decided I needed to fight back and prove my innocence. I contacted a private investigator who specialized in fraud cases and asked him to look into the evidence my brother had presented to my fiancée. The investigator was a quiet, methodical man who didn't make any promises about what he might find. He simply took copies of everything my brother had shown her and said he would get back to me within a few days with his initial findings. Those few days felt like an eternity, but when he finally called me back, his voice carried a tone that made my heart race with anticipation. He asked me to come to his office immediately because he had discovered something significant that I needed to see in person. When I arrived at his office, he spread out a series of documents and photographs on his desk and began explaining what he had found. The evidence against me was indeed fake, but it was so professionally done that it had taken him considerable effort to uncover the truth. The photographs had been digitally manipulated using sophisticated software, with my face carefully superimposed onto images of another man. The documents were forgeries, but they were created using official letterhead and stamps that had been stolen or copied from legitimate sources. Most shocking of all, the phone records had been fabricated using a technique that involved creating fake billing statements and call logs that would pass casual inspection. The level of sophistication required to pull this off was far beyond what I would have expected from my brother. But then the investigator dropped a bombshell that I never saw coming. While investigating the source of the fake evidence, he had stumbled upon something that explained everything and turned my entire understanding of the situation upside down. My brother, the person I had trusted more than anyone else in my life, had been hired by my fiancée's ex-boyfriend to sabotage our wedding. The ex had never gotten over losing her and had been secretly planning to win her back by destroying her relationship with me. The investigator had found financial records showing payments from the ex to my brother, along with email exchanges discussing the plan in detail. My brother had been receiving substantial amounts of money over several months to execute this elaborate scheme. The betrayal I felt was indescribable, but what made it even worse was learning that my brother had gambling debts that had left him desperate for money. He had rationalized his actions by convincing himself that he was helping me avoid a marriage that wouldn't last anyway. Armed with this evidence, I immediately went to my fiancée's apartment, hoping she would listen to me now that I had proof of the conspiracy against us. But when I knocked on her door, a neighbor told me she had moved out the previous day and hadn't left a forwarding address. The panic that washed over me was overwhelming, because I realized she might be gone forever unless I could find her quickly. I spent the next several hours calling her friends and family members, but no one would tell me where she had gone. Finally, her sister agreed to meet me at a coffee shop, and when I showed her the investigator's report, her expression changed from anger to shock to sympathy. She told me that my fiancé had been completely heartbroken and had decided to leave town to start fresh somewhere else. Her sister agreed to contact her and ask if she would be willing to see me, but she warned me that the damage might be too extensive to repair. The trust that had been broken might never be restored, even if I could prove my innocence. 2 days later, I received a call from my fiancée, and hearing her voice again made my heart ache with longing. She agreed to meet me at the park where we had had our first date, but she made it clear that she wasn't making any promises about reconciliation. When I saw her sitting on the bench where we had spent so many happy hours together, she looked exhausted and fragile, like she had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. I sat down beside her and handed her the investigator's report without saying a word. She read through it carefully, and I watched her face go through a range of emotions as she absorbed the truth about what had happened to us. When she finished, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and apologized for not believing me. But then she said something that cut me to the core. Even though she now knew I was innocent, she didn't know if she could ever trust me again because the whole experience had shaken her faith in her ability to judge people accurately. We spent the next few hours talking about everything that had happened, and slowly, I began to see glimmers of the woman I had fallen in love with. But there was also a new wariness in her eyes, a protective barrier that hadn't been there before. Over the following weeks, we began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship, but it was different now. Every conversation carried an undercurrent of uncertainty, and every gesture of affection felt like it was being carefully evaluated for sincerity. The hardest part was dealing with my family's reaction when they learned about my brother's betrayal. My parents were devastated, and the family dynamics that had been stable for decades were suddenly torn apart by the revelation of what he had done. My brother initially tried to deny everything, but when confronted with the evidence, he finally admitted to his role in the conspiracy. His justification was that he had been desperate for money and had convinced himself that he was actually protecting me from a marriage that wouldn't last. The confrontation with him was one of the most difficult experiences of my life, because I had to face the fact that the person I had trusted most in the world had been willing to destroy my happiness for money. The relationship we had built over a lifetime was effectively over. Meanwhile, my fiancé and I continued working on rebuilding our trust, but progress was slow and painful. Some days felt like we were making real headway, while others felt like we were back at square one. The ex-boyfriend who had orchestrated the whole scheme was eventually arrested and charged with fraud, but the damage he had caused to our relationship couldn't be undone by legal proceedings. The scars from his actions would be with us forever. 3 months after the truth came out, my fiancé and I decided to try again, but we agreed to take things slowly and not rush into marriage until we were both confident that our relationship was truly healed. The ring I had given her remained in a drawer, a symbol of promises that had been broken and might someday be renewed. The healing process was complicated by the fact that everyone in our social circle knew about the drama, and we constantly had to deal with questions and comments from well-meaning friends and family members. Some people couldn't understand why we were even trying to make it work after everything that had happened. But we both knew that what we had was worth fighting for, even if the path forward was uncertain and difficult. The love we shared was real, even if the trust had been damaged, and we were both committed to doing whatever it took to rebuild what had been destroyed. 6 months later, we were finally able to have honest conversations about the future, without the shadow of the conspiracy hanging over us. We started making plans again, but this time we were more cautious and deliberate about every decision. The wedding we eventually had was much smaller and more intimate than the one we had originally planned. We kept the guest list limited to people we absolutely trusted, and we made sure to have security measures in place to prevent any unwanted surprises. My brother wasn't invited, of course, and his absence was felt by everyone in attendance. The family photos looked incomplete without him, and there was a sadness underlying the celebration that couldn't be entirely overcome. But as I looked into my wife's eyes during our vows, I saw the same love and commitment that had been there 4 years earlier when I first proposed. The journey to get to that moment had been longer and more difficult than either of us had anticipated, but it had also made us stronger and more appreciative of what we had. The experience taught us both that trust is fragile and precious, and that even the people closest to us are capable of causing tremendous pain when their own desperation overrides their loyalty and love. But it also showed us that true love can survive even the most devastating betrayals if both people are willing to work for it. Looking back now, I realize that the conspiracy actually revealed important truths about the strength of our relationship and our commitment to each other. We learned that we could weather storms that would have destroyed many other couples, and that our love was deeper and more resilient than we had ever imagined. The private investigator who had uncovered the truth became an unexpected friend, and he often told us that our case was one of the most satisfying he had ever worked on because it had a happy ending. Most of his cases involved confirming people's worst suspicions about their loved ones, but ours was different. My brother eventually reached out to apologize, but by then too much time had passed and too much damage had been done for me to consider forgiving him. Some betrayals are simply too profound to overcome, regardless of the circumstances that led to them. The ex-boyfriend served time in prison for his role in the scheme, but I never felt any satisfaction from his punishment. His actions had cost us months of happiness and had left permanent scars on our relationship that would never fully heal. But we moved forward together, stronger and more committed than ever before. We learned to appreciate the quiet moments of trust and intimacy that we had once taken for granted, and we never again assumed that our love was immune to outside interference. The whole experience changed us both in fundamental ways, but it also brought us closer together in ways that might not have happened otherwise. We became more protective of our relationship and more selective about who we allowed into our inner circle. Years later, when friends ask us about the secret to our successful marriage, we always tell them that it's not about avoiding problems or betrayals, but about how you handle them when they inevitably occur. Our relationship was tested in ways that most couples never experience, and we emerged stronger because of it. The trust we rebuilt was actually deeper and more meaningful than what we had started with, because it was based on a full understanding of what we could lose and what we were willing to fight for. We learned that love isn't just about the good times, but about standing together when everything seems to be falling apart. That's the story of how my brother's betrayal nearly destroyed my life, but ultimately made my marriage stronger than I ever thought possible. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us turn out to be the experiences that teach us the most about what really matters in life.